God stirs up a kind of fear within. But it's also worth noting that each of those times, even if the people feel lost in their fear, God brings them beyond it. Often with words such as, "Do not be afraid." So perhaps part of our right relationship with God is remembering how much greater God is than us. Sometimes it's because we see the signs of God's greatness. Sometimes it's because we see the signs of our smallness. Sometimes it's both. Even if we come to a large rock and we see how great that is, or when we look at the expanse of the sky and we see how great that is, or if we stand at the ocean and feel the spray on our face and hear the roar of the ocean, sometimes those moments in nature and seeing the greatness of something will remind us of how small we are, and it's that attitude that might be the beginning of knowledge and wisdom in the faith. We could see it as not thinking too highly of ourselves. But if we have a respect and a reverence for the greatness of God, and if we have an awareness of our smallness, if somehow being afraid of something influences how we live, what are other things that we might fear? For example, I'm reminded of a conversation I overheard many years ago when I was in a chapel and a guest speaker was talking about God's love for the LGBTQ community. This was actually at the seminary where I was studying, and I was just tidying up the chapel. But there was a minister who had come there to hear the presentation, and afterwards I was clearing up. The guest speaker was still there. People were asking questions. And one minister whom I overheard said, "I agree with everything you said, but if I were to preach this to my church, I could lose my job." And what the guest speaker said was, "Sometimes losing your job is good for your soul." So this person's greatest fear, at least a fear that was shaping his behavior, was one that the guest speaker suggested was holding him back from what God would call him to do. So sometimes our fears are of what other people will think. Sometimes our fears are how society might treat us. Sometimes people hold their country, their nationality, their government in great awe. And that can be a strong sense of belonging and identifying, a proper pride in history. But sometimes being too respectful of our nationality or our government can then turn to idolatry. Many of the theologians who were writing at the time of the Second World War and afterwards were truly saying that people had replaced God with their country. Too fearful of their own governments and not bold enough to stand for peace. It's not always about the big stuff, but I'm using these big examples to show you how our respect and fear for things other than God can shape how we live and the decisions we make, and therefore our reverence for, our fear of, our respect for God can also shape our living. What the theologians would tell us is that God should be the ultimate Lord, the object of our ultimate loyalty. Whatever other affiliations we have, whatever other identities we choose, whatever other opinions and traditions might shape us, God has to be above all of that. And this is what the fear of the Lord is about. This is where wisdom begins. Recognizing the priority of which things are, what is most important and which things are of lesser importance. It's also recognizing that God is greater than our idea of God. What I mean by this is probably best captured in C.S. Lewis's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. When the children found themselves in this snowy wilderness, and the animals are talking to them, and the animals are saying with hushed whispers, "We hear that Aslan is coming. The lion is coming." They've heard about this king lion Aslan for generations, and they know that something wonderful will happen when the lion returns, but even as they speak of him, they speak in a hushed, fearful, reverent whisper. One of the children says, "But aren't you afraid of this lion? Is this lion a good lion?" And she says, "Is this a tame lion?" It is not tame, but good. What this means is that God does not behave